didn't tag you, so I forgot to.
Yeah, Justin, my computer's going to overheat. Let me move really quick.
Okay. Go ahead. Come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. Justin Canoe here. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We also have hollers all across the state, and that's all thanks to your support. We really do appreciate it. Chip in at tnholler.com. These hollers are across the state. We have Knoxville, Memphis, Murray County, Chattanooga, all those places. Make it $10 or more a month, and you get one of these sweet hats. We just got a whole new shipment in Aftyn. And also, if you're going to buy or sell a house here in Tennessee, do it through Elisa Parker. That's a way to support us. She supports us. Support her to support us. Today, we're going to talk to our friend Aftyn Behn about the elections that happened last night. Aftyn, how are you doing?
I'm all right. I pulled almost an all-nighter last night. I was on Twitter until about 1:30 a.m. and thought, I need to go to bed. And it wasn't even the Tennessee primary, Justin.
I know. You just
Twitter all night.
I'm always looking at your feed on nights like that because there are always these elections throughout the state that I didn't even know were happening that you make me realize were way more important than most people realized. And so let's talk about a few of those. Obviously, the first I want to let you know that I'm going to a Justin Bieber concert tonight, and I'm probably more excited about that than my own daughter is probably.
Yes.
I want to get that out of the way. All right. So last night's elections, obviously the first one that everybody was excited about on both sides of the aisle, frankly, I think, was this clown Madison Cawthorn going down. I'm not going to say I'm torn about it. I obviously am thrilled about it, but the way that it happened, where they basically used homophobia against him, because he came out and talked about the coke orgies, I had a little bit of a mixed feeling about celebrating the way that went down. How did you feel about it?
I think what's important to note is that top Republicans in the state of North Carolina, so we're talking about the North Carolina 11th, where Madison Cawthorn was the sitting representative. Right now, Chuck Edwards is about 1,300 votes ahead, but it looks like it's been called in his favor. But what I think is interesting to note is that the Republican leaders in the state of North Carolina coalesced. Like, they didn't just vocally denounce Cawthorn, they actually coalesced. They identified one candidate, rallied against him, funded him, and he ended up beating Madison Cawthorn, who had a lot of name recognition. So I think they're gonna play dirty tactics, right? But I think it's important to note that there weren't a lot of factions within their support.
Right. Okay. And do we know anything about the guy that beat him? Is he obviously probably pretty terrible?
I don't know if he can be as terrible as Madison Cawthorn.
That's true. All right. Well, so we'll go ahead and call that a win for humanity on some level. The next one that I think there was a big reaction to was Fetterman, John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. He secured the Democratic nomination. It feels like it was a bit of an upset in a way on the more progressive side. I don't know if it's a completely progressive side, but it's the more progressive side. This was the endorsements that Connor Lamb had. Obviously, a lot of endorsements from a lot of super PACs and people with a lot of money. And then this was Fetterman, not as many. But he's a seemingly blue collar guy, tattoos, wears hoodies, basketball shorts, and I think, as we both talked about on Twitter last night, did a couple of things that made sense. He did a rural tour. He campaigned pretty hard in rural areas, which I'm betting that Connor Lamb did too. And he also centered marijuana in his campaign. And, those two things, talking to rural voters, centering marijuana, you had a tweet that said, say it with me, workers, wages, weed. Is that what you think the secret to success is here in Tennessee also?
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to why Pennsylvania is so important in terms of 2024. But before we get there,
Sure.
yeah, this Fetterman race, I mean, I think most importantly, he had a lot of name ID because he ran as a statewide candidate. I think, as you mentioned, Connor Lamb was probably campaigning in these rural counties. But I think what's important to note about Fetterman is that he has this cross coalition appeal. And so I think what's happening is that when he's going to these areas, because he has high name ID, because he already ran on a statewide ticket, he's building a bigger and broader coalition of voters within Pennsylvania, which is why I think he'll be able to secure the nod. I also think he's running a really progressive platform. There's still some progressive policies that we could push him on as progressives in Pennsylvania. I'm sure those groups are doing it. I
Like
also
what? Like what? Because I've seen people say that, but I'm not sure. Where is he coming up short?
He recently voiced opposition to Biden appealing, I believe, Title 42, and it's an immigration policy, which I think is interesting because his wife is actually a Brazilian immigrant, grew up undocumented. And so I think we're going to see immigration play out in this race a lot, and I think he's going to have a really tighter idea and vision for what immigration reform looks like in Pennsylvania and in the country. I also should we shift to the Republican primary, which is
Sure, but I do want to just touch on, because I've seen people say this, and I want to at least acknowledge it. That Fetterman has this incident when he was mayor where he heard some what he thought were shots in his neighborhood and called the cops and chased down a black jogger who was an unarmed black jogger and pulled out a shotgun to hold the jogger there while the police showed up. The jogger was innocent, turned out to have nothing to do with it. Not a good moment. And some were thinking that this was going to really cost him, especially in black areas. We don't know right now, as we sit here, what the racial breakdown of the votes were in Pennsylvania. But I think it's important to at least mention that, especially since, as you said, in these instances, what's really important is how they respond to it. Is there a reconciliation? Is he apologizing? Is he owning it? Not that it's up to either you or I to decide how the black community ultimately will feel about this in a general election, but it has to at least matter what the response is in the wake of it. And we also need to talk about it, because if a Republican candidate had done this, we would certainly be talking about it even now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Malcolm Kenyatta, who was the a state representative elected person of color, lost, came in third last night, but he did publicly say, I'm throwing all my weight behind Fetterman. But I do agree that Republicans are going to use this to their advantage. They're going to try to peel off black voters with, a montage of this image over the course of the next few months. And I think Fetterman's going to have to step into that space and really own it and take accountability in a really public manner.
And let's talk about the Republican side. Before we do, I just want to say that Lamb has also thrown his weight behind Fetterman, saying rightly that our entire democracy is on the line in November. Dems need to be unequivocally united in defense of democracy, and we will be. John's vote in the Senate is essential. He'll have my votes in November, and I'll do everything I can to help. So that's Lamb coalescing behind Fetterman. And, I actually see at the 3-star dinner and was actually really impressed with the guy. So beating a guy like Lamb as soundly as Fetterman did, I think really speaks to how strong a candidate he is. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. And I think Connor's right that it's really important. Now let's talk about the other side. Obviously, kind of a mess. They're in the midst of what I think is a recount situation between the hedge fund boss and Dr. Oz. What do we know about what's going on there in Pennsylvania on the Republican side?
Whew, man, race to the bottom. So there's less than the margin is about less than 2,000 votes, with 95% of the precincts reporting. So it looks like it will go to a recount.
Right.
This race, there's been tons of money poured in. Trump endorsed Dr. Oz earlier than later. But what I thought was interesting is the Republican Party, there was a third kind of renegade candidate named Kathy Barnett, who was gaining ground in the final weeks there. And
she was the one that was at the insurrection, right?
Yeah.
She's a black woman who was at the insurrection.
Yeah. You can definitely pull the footage from her walking to the Capitol.
Right.
But in a three-way primary, we saw this in Ohio as well, with the 3 Republican candidates. I think we're really seeing, as there are factions within the Democratic Party, there are factions within the Republican Party, and it'll be interesting.
Crazier, and craziest.
Yeah, I do think there are some moderate Republicans.
Oh, you do? Oh, good.
They're really recognizing and acknowledging what the party has become, not what it was when they obviously subscribe to it. But yeah, so Dr. Oz, let's see if he pulls through. I would love to see a Dr. Oz John Fetterman matchup. I think it's also important to note that, like Trump, who Trump was in, the living rooms of people as he was on TV, Dr. Oz has been in the living rooms of households in Pennsylvania for a long time. So he also has really high name ID. So it's going to be lock and lock. There's going to be a ton of money spent. I also wanted to note, before we jump into the Pennsylvania 12th, Pennsylvania, they have a Senate race, and they have a gubernatorial race, which is crucial because the governor nominates the Secretary of State. And so, as we saw in terms of mitigating against the risk of election issues or potential decries of fraud in 2024, it is critical that Democrats show up in these states and vote not only for John Fetterman to secure important position in the Senate, but also for the gubernatorial candidate Josh Shapiro, because our election and presidency will be on the line.
Right. And, just to add some context to that, we're seeing all throughout the country that Republicans who did the right thing are being replaced by Trump loyalists at the top of election processes. So, for instance, there's a guy named Kenyatta who just resigned in Arizona and wrote this entire screed about how he's had to carry a gun with him wherever he went. And basically life has gotten too dangerous as the head of elections in Arizona. And so you're going to have a Trump loyalist put at the top there. In Florida, DeSantis has just appointed a guy whose wife has said the Civil War is coming, and he and his wife were pictured on a boat with a QAnon flag in charge of elections in Florida. So, one by one, even as Democrats control the White House, the House, and the Senate, at the state level, election administrators who are loyal to Trump, who believe the election was stolen or say they believe it, and will clearly not certify willingly next time, are now taking positions. So that's why these gubernatorial races are so important. And that's why everybody should be extremely alarmed about where things are headed in this country.
Yeah. So the one race I was excited about in Pennsylvania was the 12th Congressional District. And this race is emblematic of so many different themes right now that we're seeing in the progressive political world. So in this race, you had Summer Lee, who was an elected representative in the Pennsylvania state legislature, a Black woman, a lawyer, an organizer, versus Steve Irwin, who was a former Republican staffer. And so this was a head-to-head of what we're seeing in terms of the faction within the Democratic Party. You had conservative Democratic PACs like AIPAC and DMFI, the Democratic Majority for Israel, spend beaucoup bucks. I mean, in summer alone, they spent $3.3 million against her, running really negative ads. And I think what's shocking to me is that this isn't just Summer Lee's race. This happened to Erica Smith in NC01. This happened to Attica Scott in KY03, which what we're seeing is this conservative faction of the Democratic Party is really scared of progressive Black women taking the lead, which is why Summer Lee's race is so important, because if she does pull it off, which I don't know if it was called. I went to bed last night at 1:30 and it hadn't been called yet. It's important because we not only add a new member to the squad, but she's the progressive Black woman that survived this onslaught of.
Well, they're certainly saying that she won.
Okay, great.
Ayanna Pressley says she won. The one that I think hasn't been called yet is the Skinner one in Oregon. But by all accounts, I mean, she's saying, our victory shows we can overcome the billionaire class. So yes, she's another win for progressives, and it seems like that's happening more and more. Where no matter how much money they throw, it's being overcome. Another one that seemed to be kind of along these lines, but that was more expected, is Charles Booker in Kentucky. Cori Bush is welcoming him, as the nominee for Senate in Kentucky. So are you getting a general sense that progressivism is picking up steam in this country, or is
I
this
mean,
just kind
I
of
don't
like
want to say it
isolated
was.
incidents?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're still, I think in terms of the money pot that is in terms of we're being outspent is just, it's significant. But I'm really excited about, the Summer Lee race. You did mention the Oregon 5th, which when I was previously at Indivisible, Representative Kurt Schrader was in the Blue Dog Democrats coalition. And not just that, like, it's not Blue Dog Democrats. They're far right Democrats in terms of they're not voting for Biden's seminal pieces of legislation. And so he, as Biden was trying to negotiate drug prices, it was really these conservative Dems in the House that were pulling out the most progressive pieces of Biden's big package ticket items. So,
Right. And I think it's really important to hit that point because, progressives have been playing ball with Biden and,
right,
supporting his agenda and, compromising. And it's actually the quote unquote centrist Democrats that have been holding up this quote unquote centrist president's agenda. And then, they say, oh, the progressives or the radicals. Well, that defies what we're seeing with our very own eyes. So, getting more and more of these voices up there, I think is really important to make those points. And this was Summer Lee last night.
And what do people believe that they would never be able to say that we can't win on a battle for poor and working class people? That we can't say that we can't win on clean air and clean water. That we can't win on Medicare for everybody. That we can't win on a quality education for every single child.
So like that's, energy and clear message and uncompromising, in terms of her goals and what she stands for. It's just the kind of thing where you hope people see that and go, "Oh yeah, authenticity wins, energy wins, clear messaging wins." And that's why when you say workers' wages lead, that really resonates with me. And I hope more people do that around here in Tennessee.
yeah, I think the one, and I've said this before on your show, but like Medicaid expansion, I've knocked thousands of doors in Tennessee. No one knows what that is.
Right.
You really need to talk about it in terms of how this is going to affect your constituents' pocketbooks, how their daily life is going to improve, because no one knows what Medicaid expansion is besides Democrats, and you're
Right.
not building a coalition with that. So really unpack it. Like,
So what does that mean though, Afton? Like, does it mean like you say to them, how would you like to not have to worry about paying for health insurance anymore? Is that kind of thing?
Well, the Medicaid expansion only supports, it's difficult because it's not a direct line from the pocketbook to that. So what I would really like Democrats to focus on is debt. Tennessee, ranks incredibly high for medical debt. Like, talk about debt.
Right.
And rural hospitals closing, but in a way that's like, hey, what are the solution oriented policy platforms that I can create to connect those dots?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess what I was talking about is like Medicare for all would be, we're not worried about premiums. We're not worried about, deductibles. Like when you say that stuff to people in other countries, they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
There's all these
Right.
great videos of like trying to explain the Byzantine American insurance system to other people in
Yeah.
other countries. Smart people are just like, what is this? How are we supposed to navigate it if, really smart people in other countries, they don't even understand the first thing about it. So, but yeah, I agree. Simplifying it and also pointing out that, the real reason that we haven't solved these problems is because of the Republicans that are up there. And actually, Elon Musk, who I can't stand right now, was just on a podcast last night and he made the case against the supermajority in California. And like everything he was saying about the supermajority in California just is exactly what we deal with the supermajority here in Tennessee. Just supermajorities are bad, like in general. And when you don't have a balance of power, when you have a one-party system, they're not responsive to the people because they know they're going to win. And
Yeah.
that's what we're facing here in
Yeah.
Tennessee. All
Yeah.
right,
No, it's very true.
what's another one that we haven't touched on?
I think that might be, I just wanted to mention, yeah, no, I think those are all the races, but I think take home themes from yesterday's primaries. Candidates should be campaigning in rural communities. They should be showing up as their authentic selves, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And at ruralorganizing.org, in my current job, we talk about high visibility tactics. So, like what are when I showed up in a wig in rural Tennessee, pretending to be Marie Antoinette, that was memorable and people,
Right.
I had fun with it. I think also narrowing your platform to really speak in platitudes. I think Bernie Sanders excels at this, but with workers' wages, weed at the forefront. And then I think it's also important to note that we're seeing this new like crypto billionaires and billionaires in general just buying elections outright. We saw that with Peter Thiel and JD Vance. We're seeing that with the Club for Growth and buying out these candidates. And so it's just, more and more we need campaign finance reform. But until then, like we're going to be, continuing to see billionaires buying our elections.
Right. I'm really interested in this Fetterman thing because, he's such a memorable guy and, turnout, I feel like is really impacted by authentic candidates like that. So, I don't know that we've had ours here yet. I don't think Bredesen was that. And, it'll be interesting to see how that goes for them there. Gapper X, who's on here, I'm gonna talk about your baby, would you call it the Biden baby food shortage here in a minute? Because I do think there's some context you might be missing there. But before I get to that, if we don't have any other elections to talk about, I just want to mention this vote that Blackburn and Haggerty took against aid to Ukraine. There was a bipartisan 81-11 vote, and they both didn't mention it. When these things happen here, like I don't see any local media even talk about it. It's as though like there's nothing they can do, to actually get people to sit up and take notice of what they do up there. Isn't that a big part of our problem that we just don't talk enough about these bad votes that are cast by these people at the national level?
It's excruciating because I think in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, where, they're considered battlegrounds, there's money flowing in and out constantly. There's much more accountability for these representatives because there's money to play. There's people that are holding them accountable. And I'm guilty of this too. Like, I just don't think, a call to Marsha Blackburn helps anymore because it just, so and I also want to note that Tennessee is one of the least pro-constituent, pro-voter states in terms of we do not vote for our attorney general. We do not vote for our secretary of state. Right. Our state legislature has prevented us from ballot initiatives, from statewide ballot initiatives where we could pass really popular policies. Additionally, they have removed the ability for our governor to promote anything, sign anything into law via executive action. So we're looking at a state where our rights have been whittled down to basically nothing. So yeah, I'm not surprised that there's no accountability because there's very little power that we have to exert.
And on that note, this past session, a very far right Republican state legislator named Bruce Griffey wanted to put on the ballot just a question about medical marijuana because he knows how popular it is. All he wanted to do was ask, would you support this? Nothing binding, not a law, just a question on the ballot about medical marijuana. He's a judge, a Trump-supporting judge, a very extreme dude, and it was killed by Republicans because they don't want to know what the people really want. So you're exactly right. The people's voice has been diminished. Nowhere more than in Tennessee, not letting ballot initiatives, not listening to what we have to say, not electing the positions that you mentioned. And if you are pro-democracy, it's hard to imagine why you would be supporting these people.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And so I think in a state like Tennessee, I mean, we have to start locally. You have to build the Democratic brand back up from the ground because we're not going to win a statewide race for another decade. And unless people start doing the work. And I come on your show. Every time I come on your show, I'm like, you've got to step up. You and I can't be doing this. I mean, maybe I'll speak for myself, but I can't be doing this for another decade. Like,
yeah, you better be though. All right, Aftyn. Well, thanks for coming on here.
Appreciate. Do you want to talk about the baby shortage? Because I do think.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Okay, so
or the baby shortage.
The baby shortage. Well, we don't have a baby shortage. We do have baby formula shortage, and I don't have any screen grabs here because I didn't expect to talk about this on this particular show. But what I will say is, and this is for Gapper, and anybody who follows us will have seen that we've posted about this, the root causes of this are a couple of things. One is obviously there was a recall at an Abbott facility that made formula. They're saying that they had nothing to do with there was a bacterial infection that killed a few babies, and there was a recall. And because so few companies make such a huge percentage of the formula in this country, so monopolization, corporate centralization, when something like that happens, it cripples us. And so, antitrust, anti-monopolization, these issues have to be centered. And it is something actually Biden has talked about, but these are the kind of things that Republicans are against always. So, that's one thing that you need to think about. The other thing to think about is this also goes back to Trump's trade policies.
Yep.
So, the protectionist trade policies that raise tariffs on importing goods are a big reason why we haven't been able to get formula from places like Canada. We will post, and we have posted links about these issues. That's where this starts. The other part of this is he's getting knocked for to take care of migrant children, infants, and that's a policy that goes back 25 years that administrations have been following, one after another, Republicans and Democrats. And at the end of the day, it's also the right thing to do. So, not to say that it's only because of policy reasons, but also if you're upset that infants are getting formula because they're not born here or they're not white, like that's a gross thing. And I appreciate that everybody's telling on themselves, especially Marsha Blackburn. So, the question becomes, what is Biden going to do? And that's a fair question. And, the sooner the better. And it should be treated like an emergency. I have faith that they actually are doing that. But, to point the finger at Biden for all of these reasons, when this has been a long time coming, and it reveals a lot of problems in our system that actually Democrats have been trying to do more to impact than Republicans, it just misses the point entirely. And all you're doing is swallowing the Fox News garbage. After what do you think?
That's 100%. And I will say, folks may have seen that I went to the White House last week. And Biden announced that low-income families now get $30 towards their internet bill. It's getinternet.gov, right? And I was sitting in the audience in the Rose Garden watching President Biden really, I felt like he really cared about American families, working American families and low-income families in the United States. And I've never felt that way before. I think he really hears what's happening. He's trying to address it. The Senate, he's nominated anti-monopoly, anti-corporate consolidation advocates at these federal agencies. He's trying to pass legislation. He's trying to do it. And as Justin said, the quick and easy is to scapegoat immigrants and to be upset and to blame Biden. And what I want to do, Justin, I'm sure you've seen those stickers with Biden pointing, I did that at gas stations.
Yeah.
I want to print out a sticker with the that says, the average CEO income of Exxon and Shell, and say, big oil did that. It's really these giant, massive monopolies that are not paying their fair share in taxes, that are messing with the supply chain and hurting working American families.
Yeah. And, frankly, the stickers like the ones you're talking about are good ideas, and billboards work. And these are things that Democrats don't do enough of. And Republicans, it's always their first instinct is to go do that stuff. And even though, generally speaking, I think their messaging is bullshit and lies, the way that they get those messages out there is usually pretty effective, which is why, you've got people calling it the Biden baby food shortage in our mentions right here, because that's what they've repeated on Fox News over and over and over again. And that works. And the Democrats are not as good at that, partly because the solutions are always more complicated than the problem, but also because they're just not as in lockstep with one another. And that's, something to point out and to try to get fixed. But I don't know that it ever will.
I mean, listen, I'm a progressive. I endorse Bernie Sanders. There are lots of things that Biden needs to be doing, but what I have seen in terms of building rural infrastructure, trying to consolidate support in a way that actually seeps down to the American people and some of the most rural and isolated communities in our country, he's doing that. And the fear base, I'm asking you to dig a little deeper as to why this is happening, and to really question. And, at its core, it's our system, it's capitalism. It's,
right.
And I think what's funny, Justin, I'm sure you've seen this too, are the images of, the barren grocery store shelf saying, well, this is Cuba. And it's actually, that's the Food Lion in Murfreesboro. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we're dealing with that, and I think I would also point out that if Trump was in office, we could have no confidence that he'd be blaming people, but would he be really fixing the issue? We saw what happened with the COVID outbreak and how supply chains and actually dealing with getting things to people who need them was the furthest thing from his mind. You even had Republican governors like the one in Maryland, Hogan, speaking out, being like, "This guy has completely dropped the ball and doesn't care about people." So, I believe Biden is trying his best when it comes to that. We could. I'm not. I've supported Bernie too. I don't think Biden's perfect, but I think his heart is at least in the right place, and I'm confident that they're doing all they can right now. They've at least heard the problem. Let's see if anybody else has said anything. I see Rayanne wrote something long, but I don't know what all that says. Hey, get Justin Jones elected so he can shake up the state legislature. I'm not going to read the rest of that, but that is an interesting race, Justin Jones and Delisha Porterfield. I personally know Justin better, and I do think he'd be a great voice in there. I've heard great things about Delisha too, so it seems like either way, hopefully we're going to have someone speaking up. But I am a Justin Jones fan.
And competitive primaries are good. I mean, look what, and I think it's important, like they make the candidates better. There's more money poured into the district, so you have more aware constituents. And I will tell you, if you become a primary voter in an election, you are 80% more likely to become a lifetime voter. So these primary races are really important, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Me too. And I know Justin's going to be out there knocking doors, so I hope Delisha is too. I was in a contested primary. I didn't want to be in one. I was hopeful that wasn't going to have one, but I will absolutely say that once I had one, I definitely came out of there feeling like it made me a better candidate. It was better for the process, better for the voters. And, so I agree with you. Contested primaries are good, and I hope they both get to work. Aftyn, thanks for what you're doing. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Yeah, two things. I mean, the Tennessee primary is in August, so please, 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 check your voter registration, look who's on the ballot. And the last thing I'll say is Biden released more COVID tests, so you can actually order 8 more COVID tests for free. So Justin, I'll send you the link, and if you can promote that so people can get tested and be safe.
Definitely will. All right. Thanks, Aftyn, for coming on here. Thanks, everybody, for following, especially you, Gapper X. Even though we don't seem to agree about much, I do appreciate that people come on here and at least present the other side and are willing to hear what we have to say. So it means a lot. We'll see you next time. Follow Aftyn at Aftyn Behn on Twitter, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, y'all.